Listen, first of all, it was interesting, as I was listening to Michael and Dale, and both really interesting presentations, I found myself thinking about the building on strengths. And I was sort of thinking to myself, there's two ways that could be applied here, and I think it's interesting that it's left ambiguous. Building on strengths could be building on their strengths, and I take it that means the clients, right? Or those people that you provide services to. Can you hear me, by the way? Am I coming through okay? Yes? Or building on strengths could be building on your strengths. Your strengths as a community of service providers and a group that need to work together. The area that I work on generally is collaboration, and that's really what I'm here to talk to you about. This afternoon I'm going to do a presentation, a workshop, and talk about how collaboration works. But what I really want to think about, and what I want you to think about, or what I want to talk to you about, is just some very fundamental ideas about what collaboration is and why it matters to you as a community, and in particular, why it matters to you in terms of your relationship to the government, the provincial government especially, that helps support, direct, and maybe sometimes control you. Does it let you collaborate? Does it let you build on your strengths? I'm involved in a project right now in Ontario with the Government of Ontario looking at disability support payments and essentially the opportunity to make or help service providers work better at the community level. And what really brought this on was, I think, growing awareness by the Ontario government that a lot of the tools it uses to manage the community really aren't very effective tools at all. We all care about results, we want results, but sometimes managing for results looks like, or at least the way we do it, it conflicts with our ability to actually make choices and do some of the things we want to do, and it maybe stops us from working together as a community, from building on our strengths as a community of service providers. So let me just say a few things about collaboration. I think I've got about 10 to 20 minutes. I wanted to take 10 and then sort of open it up for a few questions, if that works for you. I don't see any microphones, but I think that's legal. First of all, collaboration for me is a really common sense idea. I always say to people, if you don't know how to collaborate, you're a flawed human being. This is something that your parents should have taught you when you were at their knee. We all know how to collaborate. We know how to do it when we do things well. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to get along with one another. But it's one thing to talk about collaboration, our intuitive knowledge about how to do it on the one hand, and on the other hand, our ability to apply it in an institutional setting. And that's, I think, where we're struggling. We talk about the need to work together as a community, and yet how we manage each other, how we work together, how governments manage us, makes that often very difficult. So I want to say this about, the first thing is, why would we want to collaborate? Well, again, this is common sense. You look around the room, all of you have shared goals of all sorts. You're working in the same area. You know that people with disabilities, as we've just heard, have all kinds of needs. You're joined together by your common commitment to resolving that goals, to providing support to those people. And that means you're stronger together than you are apart. Again, this is common sense. If we work together, we will be more effective. There's a lot that needs to be done. But here's the thing, we tend to hear about collaboration as something that requires a shared goal. Yeah, it requires a shared goal, folks, but you know what? Shared goals are a dime a dozen. There are lots of them. It's not to say they're unimportant. It's just to say that if you have a shared goal, there's no guarantee that you either can or will be able to collaborate. The hard part of collaboration really is around a shared plan. How do you get from a shared goal to a shared plan? First of all, let me tell you how governments understand this, and I think that's a part of the problem. I'd like to think that maybe partly as a result of people like me, they're rethinking some of this. But when governments think about how they get to a plan with you, how they will manage you so that you can deliver services to the community better, they do what I call consultation. It's a word you've surely heard. When they develop a policy, they rent a big room like this lots of times. They invite a whole bunch of you guys to come out. They set up some microphones in the room. They stand up or sit at the front of the room like I'm doing now. And they ask you, what do you think we should do to manage you better, to make this work? And they ideally listen. Maybe sometimes they don't. But let me be generous and say they listen. And you get up at the microphones and you tell them what you think that they should do. And maybe they travel around the province and they listen to a whole bunch of different people like you, clients and service providers and others, and they take a whole bunch of notes and then they retire into the antechamber, 2 or 3 or 4 or however many of them there may be, and they crunch all that stuff they've heard, ideally. They think about what you've told them, they reflect on it, they consolidate it, and they build it into a plan, and they build the plan often into a policy. And ideally, if they've done this well, they've made some choices, they come back with the plan and they say to you, here it is. But let me just ask you to stop for a second and think about that. Think about that in the context of collaboration. When somebody comes to you and says, here it is, here's the plan, here's how you will do it, how do you feel about that? Does it let you build on your strengths? Does it let you do what you do well? Does it let you make choices to work with others the way you need to? And to say that it doesn't, and folks, it doesn't, is not to call government into question. It's to say process matters. It's to say that how we actually arrive at the policies and decisions that frame what you do and put parameters around how you make choices and what choices you're allowed to make really matters. And the process itself is flawed. It's flawed from the beginning for a very simple reason. What it really does is it creates an environment where somebody is giving you a plan, and that means that ultimately your job is to follow the plan. They may have nice ideas like we're going to manage for results, we're going to get you to achieve outcomes, and believe me, I'm not opposed to outcomes. But the problem there is, how do you actually start to manage for outcomes? How do you pursue outcomes when in fact you don't have much flexibility to make choices? How do you get that flexibility? So I guess the real question that I want to say here, or the lesson is, process does matter, and consultation is a particular kind of tool and process. It's a process that is fine for arriving at decisions that a government can implement on its own, that it can tell others, do this, and they can do it, and they will achieve the goal. But that's exactly not the environment you're in. You're in an environment where if you want to build on your strengths, you have to be able to work together. You have to be able to make choices. You have to be able to make compromises with one another. You have to be able to be flexible, and it doesn't provide that space for flexibility. Collaboration is a process, it's a real process, by which we actually set parameters on our ability to work together. I guess I'm here to tell you, not so much today, but maybe for those of you who come to the session this afternoon, about how we actually design a process that isn't just a free-for-all. It just doesn't tell you sit down and sort this out with your buddies, but begins to understand how governments and organizations and communities like your own can work together in a much more flexible way that allows you or gives you the space you need to make choices. In a nutshell, I just say this, is that collaboration is about shared goals. And it's shared goals that people will pursue. You have an incentive to work together because when you work together, you get better results, and we all want good results. It's about dialogue, but it's not about free-for-all dialogue. It's about dialogue that's designed to lead to action and lead to action together in a coordinated and collaborated way. And it's based on rules and a clear path. So collaboration is a very different kind of process. It's a very different kind of way of doing business than consultation. My argument to you and to governments, maybe you I won't have to convince, governments it's a little harder, is they need to stop consulting with you. They need to start collaborating with you so that you can collaborate with each other and ultimately that you can collaborate with the clients that you work with. I want to wind this up just by saying a few things about why governments are reserved, afraid, nervous about collaboration, about that word. The good news, by the way, is I've been in this business for 25 years. I do lots of collaboration projects of all sorts, not just on persons with disabilities or social policy, but a wide range of things. And what I have found is across this country and around the world, certainly in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, I think there is a much greater willingness for governments to contemplate collaboration and begin to realize that if they really want better outcomes, they have to figure out how to create a space in which that's possible. But still, there's a few misconceptions they labor under, and I think that's what we need to dispel in governments' minds. I just want to say a few words about 3 or 4 fundamental misconceptions about what collaboration is and how it works. First of all, there's a tendency among governments to believe that if they collaborate with you, they will somehow lose authority. How many of you have heard this before? How many of you think it's true? Here's what I want to say. The reason collaboration matters, the reason government should collaborate with you and you with one another is because you have different talents, you have different responsibilities, you have different interests that converge on the same goal. Governments will not lose an ounce of authority by collaborating with you because what they really need to realize is when they sit down to collaborate, you don't get to make the decision for them. They still get to make decisions, and so do you. The difference is now they're going to make their decisions with you. And that means you sit down at the table together and you have an adult open conversation about what needs to be done to promote our common interests. And government is not there to tell you what to do, and you're not there to tell government what to do. You're there to figure out how you can do what you do better together. And in that sense, government isn't giving up any authority. It can always say no, and so can you, in principle. But the idea is we will do it openly, and if we discuss with one another, we make decisions together that are more effective for all of us. So collaboration is not about government giving away its authority. That's a huge misconception. Another thing governments worry about is it will lead to bad decisions, and they will be saddled with all the bad decisions that you as service providers make if they let you make more choices. How many of you think that's true? Nobody? Nobody? I would just say this, as a guy who works in this field all the time, my experience is that people are eminently reasonable. Is that when you sit them down at the table and they have common interests and they have a chance to talk it through and work it through together, they make reasonable decisions. You will make reasonable decisions. You will work well with each other. That's not to say there won't be misunderstandings. It's not to say there won't be disagreements. But the reality is, once people are responsible for their choices, they tend to make reasonable choices. And lots of evidence shows this to be true. Another myth that governments labor under that I think we genuinely need to dispel. If you get to make decisions, it doesn't mean you will start making all kinds of bad ones that they're saddled with. And finally, the thing I hear from politicians all the time is if we sit down a bunch of service providers in whatever area and let them start thinking through what needs to be done and negotiating with us, we will end up with endless bickering and endless talk. And in fact, I say again, my experience is that simply isn't true. Sometimes talk gets off the rails, but it gets off the rails for the politicians as much as it does for you. The reality is a good process, well designed with good rules, actually usually leads to people quickly wanting to make decisions. How many of you don't want to make decisions? Presumably when you sit down, you want to find a plan, make a plan, and deliver it. And the incentive is there to do it if you have the opportunity. What you really need is the opportunity. Finally, I want to say one last thing here. It's about trust. The last thing I think that's difficult for government to swallow in collaboration is the idea of trust. Collaboration is a trust-based relationship. It is not a relationship of control. That doesn't mean there aren't parameters on it. It doesn't mean there aren't rules. But what it means is this: if you and I are going to work together, we can only work together as partners if I trust that you are going to do what you tell me you're going to do, and you trust that I'm going to do what I tell you to do. But there's every reason to believe that that's true. If we share a common goal and we have a history of working together, why wouldn't we work together to make our outcomes better for both of us? The real challenge here for governments is to recognize that the trust is not a long shot. Ultimately, people have reasons to work together and will, and that these are trust relationships, but we have to create the space in which trust carries those decisions and allows us to work together. Let me just close by returning to that concept of building on strengths. It certainly is my view that it's a wonderful expression, and it is what has to happen. But the building on strengths, as I said at the beginning, really does have to happen at both levels. You can only build on the strengths of the people you're serving if you can build on your own strengths as a community and make those kinds of choices. And I think that requires a different kind of relationship with each other and ultimately with the governments that fund and support you. So I thank you very much, and I look forward this afternoon to talking to some of you in the workshop.